Admiral Kethavar stood on the command deck of his massive warship and watched the planet below through the viewing screen. The blue and green world looked peaceful from space, but he knew that would change soon. His fleet of 12 ships hung in perfect formation around the planet like a metal necklace. Each ship was exactly where it needed to be, according to the battle plans that had worked for 3,000 years. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered half the galaxy using the same methods over and over again. First, they would study the enemy from a safe distance. Then they would calculate the exact amount of force needed to win. Finally, they would attack with surgical precision until the enemy surrendered. It was clean and efficient, and it always worked. Kethavar had done this same routine 47 times in his military career. The species they conquered were all the same in the end. They fought for territory or resources or old grudges. They followed rules of war that made sense. Honor duels between champions, battles over specific locations, fights that ended when one side clearly lost. The insect-like Kreks had tried to swarm their ships with small fighters. The water-breathing Veltar had attempted to hide in gas clouds and ambush single vessels. The crystal beings called Silani had used their natural hardness to ram Zephyrian ships. All of these tactics were predictable and easily countered by superior technology and better planning. Today they would add another species to their empire. The inhabitants of this planet called themselves humans, and they had been causing trouble in this sector for months. 3 human settlements on nearby worlds had already been taken by Zephyrian forces. The humans had fought well enough, but nothing that surprised the Empire's military computers. Kethavar pulled up the intelligence files on his personal screen. Humans were a young species that had only recently developed faster than light travel. Their ships were crude and inefficient compared to Zephyrian technology. Their weapons were simple projectile throwers and basic energy beams. Most importantly, their military tactics followed standard patterns that the Empire's war computers could easily predict. The tactical analysis showed a 97% chance of victory within the standard time frame of 72 hours. Kethavar had seen these numbers many times before. His forces would begin with precise orbital bombardment of military targets. Then they would disable the planet's communication networks and power sources. Finally, ground troops would land to accept the surrender of whatever government remained. It was all very civilized by galactic standards. The Zephyrians had learned long ago that destroying everything was wasteful. Better to capture intact cities and productive populations. Better to preserve valuable infrastructure that could be used by the Empire. Better to minimize casualties on both sides so that the conquered species could be integrated peacefully into Zephyrian society. Captain Velkan approached from his position at the weapons control station. He was young for a ship captain, but he had proven himself reliable in previous campaigns. His dark blue skin showed the ritual scars that marked him as a veteran of 15 successful conquests. "Admiral, the fleet reports ready for the first phase of operations," Velkan said in the formal tone required for battlefield communications. "All ships are in position and awaiting your orders to begin orbital bombardment." Kethavar nodded and studied the tactical display one more time. The human settlements on the planet below were marked in red on his screen. Small cities scattered across 2 continents with a total population of about 2 million individuals. Their military consisted of a few ground-based defense platforms and maybe 20 small spacecraft that barely qualified as fighters. "Begin Phase 1, Kethavar commanded. "Target military installations only. Minimum force required to disable their defensive capabilities." The first wave of energy beams lanced down from the Zephyrian fleet toward the planet's surface. Each shot was carefully calculated to destroy specific targets without causing unnecessary damage to surrounding areas. Communication towers vanished in brief flashes of light. Military bases were reduced to smoking craters. Spacecraft launching pads were melted into useless metal. The humans responded exactly as the tactical computers had predicted. Their small fighters launched in groups of 3 or 4 and attempted to climb toward the orbital fleet. Their defense platforms fired streams of projectiles that posed no real threat to Zephyrian shields. Ground-based missile launchers sent volleys of primitive rockets that were easily intercepted by point defense systems. "Phase 1 complete," reported Captain Velkan after 20 minutes of bombardment. "Enemy military response has been neutralized. No damage to our forces. Ready to proceed to Phase 2. Kethavar watched the tactical display update with new information. The human fighters had been destroyed or driven off. Their defense platforms were smoking ruins. Communication networks were down across most of the planet. Everything was proceeding according to the standard conquest timeline. Excellent, Kethvar said. Begin Phase 2. Target power generation facilities and major transportation hubs. Prepare ground forces for landing operations. The second wave of attacks was just as precise as the first. Power plants were disabled with surgical strikes that left them damaged but repairable. Spaceports were cratered but not obliterated. Highway bridges were severed at key points to limit enemy movement, but could be rebuilt within weeks. The Zephyrian Empire had turned warfare into an exact science. As the bombardment continued, Kethvar felt the satisfaction of another successful operation. In 48 hours, ground troops would accept the surrender of local human leaders. Within a week, the planet would be integrated into the Empire's administrative system. Within a month, human workers would be contributing to Imperial productivity under the guidance of Zephyrian overseers. It was a process that had worked perfectly for 3 millennia, against dozens of different species across hundreds of different worlds. The Zephyrian Empire had grown to control 12 star systems and over 50 inhabited planets using these same careful methods. Each conquest made them stronger and more experienced. Kethvar had no reason to think that conquering humanity would be any different from all the others. His computers told him that human psychology and tactics fell within normal parameters for primitive species. His sensors showed that human technology posed no significant threat to Imperial forces. His experience suggested that this would be just another routine addition to the Empire's long list of successful campaigns. The Admiral settled back in his command chair and watched his perfectly orchestrated fleet continue its methodical destruction of human military capabilities. In 3 days, this would all be over, and he would submit another victory report to the Imperial High Command. Just like always. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and stared at the warning lights flashing across his control panels. The distress signal had come through just 6 hours ago from the human colony on Kepler 442b. 3 other settlements had already gone silent in the past week, and now this one was under attack by unknown forces. The Defiance was a heavy cruiser built for long-range patrol missions along the outer rim of human space. She carried a crew of 250 people and enough firepower to handle pirates or raiders. Morrison had commanded her for 3 years and thought he knew what his ship could do in a fight. He was about to find out if he was right. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan turned from her communication station with a grim expression on her face. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and her blue eyes showed the strain of monitoring emergency frequencies for hours. She had been picking up fragments of transmissions from the planet below, but nothing coherent enough to understand what was happening. "Captain, we are receiving multiple distress calls from the surface," Sullivan reported in a steady voice. "I am detecting weapons fire and explosions, but the signals are being jammed by some kind of interference. Whatever is attacking the colony has advanced electronic warfare capabilities." Morrison nodded and turned to his first officer, Commander Alex Rodriguez. The dark-haired man was studying sensor readings at his station with a focused intensity that Morrison had learned to respect. Rodriguez had served in the border conflicts against smugglers and pirates for 8 years before joining the Defiance crew. "Alex, what are our sensors telling us about the situation?" Morrison asked. Rodriguez looked up from his displays with a troubled expression. "Sir, we are detecting 12 large vessels in orbit around the planet. They are arranged in a perfect hexagonal formation, about 50,000 kilometers above the surface. Each ship appears to be roughly twice the size of the Defiance, and they are using some kind of energy weapons for orbital bombardment." Morrison felt his stomach tighten as he processed this information. 12 ships of that size meant they were facing a fleet that could easily destroy his single vessel. But the distress calls from the planet meant that human civilians were dying, while he calculated odds and risks. "What about their technology level?" Morrison asked. "Can we identify the attackers?" Sullivan spoke up from her station. "Sir, I am detecting communication patterns that do not match any known human or alien protocols in our database. The universal translator is having trouble with their language, but it appears they are conducting some kind of systematic military operation." The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Humanity had only made first contact with alien civilizations 6 months ago, when they developed faster than light travel. The initial meetings had been peaceful, but everyone knew that not all species in the galaxy would be friendly to human expansion. "Morrison, walked over to the main viewing screen and stared at the image of the planet ahead. From this distance, it looked like a peaceful blue and green world, but he knew that people were fighting and dying on its surface. The captain had sworn an oath to protect human settlements, and he intended to keep that promise regardless of the odds. "Helm, take us in closer," Morrison ordered. "I want a better look at these alien ships before we decide on a course of action." The Defiance accelerated toward the planet and the unknown fleet. As they got closer, the ship's sensors began picking up more detailed information about the attacking vessels. They were sleek and elegant, with smooth hulls that seemed to absorb sensor scans. Their formation was mathematically perfect, with each ship positioned at exactly the same distance from its neighbors. Rodriguez studied the tactical readings with growing concern. "Sir, these ships are using energy weapons that are far more advanced than anything in our arsenal. Their targeting is extremely precise, and they seem to be hitting specific military targets while avoiding civilian areas." Morrison found that detail interesting and troubling at the same time. Military forces that took care to minimize civilian casualties usually had specific goals beyond simple destruction. They wanted something from the planet, and that something probably included capturing human prisoners. "Communications," Morrison called out. "Are you receiving any surrender demands or diplomatic messages from the attacking fleet?" Sullivan shook her head. "No, sir. Their communications appear to be purely military coordination between their ships. They are not attempting to contact the planet or demand surrender. They seem to be following some kind of predetermined attack plan." The Defiance continued its approach toward the alien fleet, and Morrison found himself studying their formation more carefully. It was textbook perfect by every measure he could think of. Maximum coverage of the planet with minimum vulnerability to counterattack. Overlapping fields of fire that would make it impossible for defending forces to approach without being detected and destroyed. But there was something about the formation that bothered Morrison. It was too perfect, too predictable, like something he might have seen in a military academy training simulation. Real combat formations were usually messier because real battles were chaotic and unpredictable. Alex, Morrison said slowly, "What do you make of their battle formation?" Rodriguez studied the tactical display for a moment before responding. "Sir, it appears to be optimized for fighting an enemy that follows conventional military doctrine. Classic orbital bombardment setup with mutual support between vessels. Very effective against targets that attack in predictable patterns." Morrison felt a cold smile cross his face as he began to understand what they were dealing with. These aliens had obviously conquered other species using the same careful, methodical approach. They had refined their tactics over many successful campaigns, and now they were applying those same tactics to humanity. The problem was that human military doctrine had been shaped by centuries of warfare against other humans. Earth's history was filled with conflicts where survival depended on doing the unexpected, where victory went to whoever could adapt fastest to changing circumstances, where honor and rules meant less than winning at any cost. "Kate, get me an open channel to the alien fleet," Morrison ordered. Sullivan looked up in surprise. "Sir, are you planning to negotiate with them?" Morrison shook his head. "I am planning to give them one chance to leave before we show them how humans really fight." The communication channel opened, and Morrison stepped forward to address the unknown aliens who thought they could add humanity to their list of conquered species. He was about to teach them that some species were too dangerous to conquer. Captain Morrison opened the communication channel, and his voice carried across space to the alien fleet with cold determination. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Defiance. You are ordered to cease your attack on human territory and withdraw immediately. You have 30 seconds to comply." On the bridge of the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Kethvar listened to the translation with something approaching amusement. A single primitive ship was demanding that his entire battle fleet withdraw from a successful military operation. The tactical computer had already analyzed the human vessel and determined it posed minimal threat to Imperial forces. "Admiral, shall we respond to their demand?" asked Captain Velkan from his position at the weapons station. Kethvar studied the approaching human ship on his viewing screen. It was smaller than any vessel in his fleet, and its hull showed the crude construction typical of primitive species. According to his sensors, it carried fewer than 300 crew members compared to the 8,000 warriors under his command. "Ignore them," Kethvar replied. "Continue the bombardment according to schedule. If they attempt to interfere, then destroy them quickly and proceed with the operation." Back on the Defiance. Morrison counted down the seconds as he watched the alien fleet continue its methodical attack on the planet below. When 30 seconds passed without any response, he turned to his weapons officer, Chief Ben Carter, with a grim smile. Carter was a veteran of the border wars who had learned his trade fighting pirates and raiders in the outer systems. His weathered face showed the scars of boarding actions and ship-to-ship combat. More importantly, he understood that sometimes winning meant breaking every rule in the book. Ben, implement Doctrine Alpha, Morrison ordered. Show these aliens what human warfare really looks like. Carter's hands moved across his control panel with practiced efficiency. Doctrine Alpha was something the human military had developed during the worst conflicts in Earth's history. It was based on a simple principle that most alien species had never encountered. When fighting for survival, there were no rules except winning. The Defiance suddenly accelerated toward the alien formation at maximum speed. Every engine on the ship roared to life, pushing the vessel far beyond its normal operating limits. Warning alarms sounded throughout the ship as various systems strained against the massive forces involved. Admiral Kethvar watched in surprise as the human ship charged directly toward his fleet. According to every tactical model in the Imperial database, this was suicide. A single vessel attacking a formation of 12, ships had no chance of survival, and would accomplish nothing except its own destruction. Admiral, the human ship is approaching at attack speed, reported Captain Velkin with confusion in his voice. Their course will take them directly through our formation. Should we target them with our main weapons? Kethvar hesitated for a moment as he tried to understand what the humans were attempting. Their approach vector made no tactical sense. They were not targeting any specific ship or trying to exploit a weakness in the formation. They seemed to be heading straight into the middle of 12 heavily armed vessels. Target them with the nearest ships, Kethvar finally ordered. Disable their engines and weapons, but try to capture them intact for interrogation. The first Zephyrian energy beams lanced out toward the approaching human ship. But instead of trying to dodge or retreat, the Defiance did something that violated every rule of space combat. The ship launched a spread of nuclear missiles not at the alien vessels, but at the empty space around them. The fusion warheads detonated in brilliant flashes that sent electromagnetic pulses racing through the alien formation. Suddenly, the perfect coordination between Zephyrian ships began to break down as their sensors were overloaded and their communication systems jammed by the nuclear interference. Chief Carter had studied every major battle in human history from ancient times to the space age. He understood that technology alone never won wars. What mattered was the willingness to do whatever it took to achieve victory regardless of the cost or the risk. All weapons free, Carter announced over the ship's communication system. Target their command vessels and disrupt their formation. The Defiance plunged through the alien fleet like a missile launched from hell itself. Instead of engaging in long-range combat like a civilized military force, the human ship closed to point-blank range where its primitive weapons could do maximum damage to sophisticated alien technology. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brooks worked frantically at her tactical station to coordinate the attack. She had programmed the ship's targeting computers with data from every successful military campaign in human history. The key was not to fight the enemy on their terms, but to force them to fight on yours. The Defiance scraped its armored hull against the shields of alien vessels as it carved a path through their formation. Chunks of metal and debris flew in all directions as the human ship treated space combat like a bar. Fight where anything goes, and the last one standing wins. Admiral Kethvar watched in growing alarm as his perfect battle formation dissolved into chaos. The human ship seemed to anticipate every move his vessels made. When his captains tried to establish firing solutions, the humans jammed their targeting systems. When they attempted to coordinate their response, the humans disrupted their communications. Admiral, our formation is breaking apart, reported Captain Velkan with panic creeping into his voice. The human ship is using tactics that our computers cannot predict or counter. On the Defiance, damage reports were flooding in from all sections of the ship. Hull breaches on multiple decks, engine temperatures approaching critical levels. Life support systems failing in several compartments, but Captain Morrison kept pushing his ship and crew beyond their limits because that was what humans did when their backs were against the wall. Commander Rodriguez coordinated damage control teams throughout the ship while monitoring the tactical situation. Sir, we have disabled 4 alien vessels and their flagship is showing signs of engine damage. But we cannot take much more punishment. Morrison studied the battle display with cold calculation. His ship was dying around him, but the alien formation was in complete disarray. The key now was to press the advantage before they could recover and coordinate a proper response. "Kate, open a channel to their flagship," Morrison ordered. "Let me talk to whoever is in charge of this fleet." The communication channel opened, and Morrison addressed Admiral Kethvar with the voice of someone who had just demonstrated that humans fought wars to win them. No matter what the cost and no matter what rules had to be broken in the process. The communication channel crackled with static as Captain Morrison faced Admiral Kethvar across the void of space. Around them, the remnants of the once perfect Zephyrian formation drifted in confused clusters while the battered USS Defiance held position with its weapons still trained on the alien flagship. Morrison could see the damage his ship had inflicted during their desperate charge through the enemy fleet. 4 Zephyrian vessels were dead in space with their engines dark and their weapons offline. 3 more showed visible hull damage from close-range weapons fire. The flagship itself was listing slightly as atmosphere vented from several breaches in its hull. "This is Captain Jake Morrison, speaking to the commander of the attacking fleet," Morrison said in a calm voice that carried the weight of absolute determination. "Your formation has been broken and your vessels are damaged. Withdraw from human space immediately and this ends here." On the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical display with growing disbelief. In 6 hours of combat, a single primitive ship had reduced his battle fleet to a collection of crippled vessels struggling to maintain basic formation. The mathematical certainty of victory had been replaced by the very real possibility of defeat. Captain Velkin approached with a damage report that confirmed Kethvar's worst fears. "Admiral, we have lost main engines on 4 ships and weapon systems on 2 others. The remaining vessels are low on ammunition, and their crews are reporting high stress levels. I recommend we fall back to regroup and call for reinforcements." Kethvar had commanded Zephyrian fleets for 20 years, and had never faced a situation like this. The humans fought with a desperation and creativity that his military training had never prepared him to counter. They seemed willing to sacrifice their own ship to achieve victory, and that willingness made them incredibly dangerous. Dr. Rachel Martinez worked at her station on the Defiance Bridge analyzing the alien communications that Lieutenant Sullivan had been intercepting throughout the battle. As the ship's chief science officer, she had been studying alien psychology and behavior patterns during the engagement. "Captain, I am detecting something interesting in their transmissions," Martinez reported. "Fear. The aliens are not just confused by our tactics, they are genuinely afraid of us. Their communications show stress patterns that suggest they have never encountered an enemy willing to fight to the death." Morrison found that information both useful and troubling. An enemy that was afraid might be more likely to withdraw, but they might also become more dangerous if they felt cornered. The key was to convince them that continuing the fight would cost more than they were willing to pay. Commander Rodriguez coordinated repair teams throughout the ship while monitoring the status of their weapons and engines. The Defiance had taken severe damage during the battle, but she was still functional and still dangerous. More importantly, the crew was still ready to fight despite the punishment they had endured. "Sir, damage control reports that we can maintain weapons power for another 4 hours, Rodriguez said. "Engine efficiency is down to 60%, but we still have full maneuverability. Life support is stable on all decks despite the hull breaches." Morrison nodded and turned back to the communication channel where Admiral Kethvar was waiting for his response. The alien commander looked shaken by the turn of events, but he had not yet agreed to withdraw his forces from human territory. "Admiral, you have seen what one human ship can do to your fleet," Morrison continued. "If you remain in our space, then more ships will come. Ships with crews who have learned the same lessons that my people learned during centuries of warfare on our homeworld." Kethvar listened to the translation with growing unease. The human captain was not making empty threats. The tactical computer had analyzed their fighting methods and concluded that humans represented a completely new type of military challenge. They fought without regard for their own safety and used tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Lieutenant Sullivan intercepted a priority transmission from deep space, and her expression grew tense as she listened to the message. The communication was coming from the direction of Zephyrian space, and it was addressed directly to Admiral Kethvar using military encryption codes. "Captain, I am detecting a Transmission to the alien flagship from what appears to be their home fleet, Sullivan reported. The signal is heavily encrypted, but I am picking up fragments of the message. It appears to be new orders for the Admiral. On the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Kethvar received the transmission from Imperial High Command with a mixture of relief and humiliation. The message was brief and direct. Intelligence reports indicated that humans were too dangerous to be conquered using standard methods. All Zephyrian forces were ordered to withdraw from human space immediately and establish a quarantine zone around their territory. The implications of those orders struck Kethvar like a physical blow. In 3,000 years of galactic expansion, the Zephyrian Empire had never declared any species too dangerous to conquer. Pirates and raiders were hunted down and destroyed. Hostile aliens were defeated and absorbed into the Empire. But humans represented something new and terrifying. Captain Velkan read the orders over his admiral's shoulder, and his expression showed the same shock that Kethvar was feeling. Sir, these orders mean that High Command is abandoning our conquest of this sector. We are being ordered to retreat from a single human ship. Kethvar closed his eyes for a moment as he absorbed the full meaning of the situation. His military career was probably over, but that was less important than the larger implications for the Empire. Humans had proven that they could not be conquered by conventional means, and that made them a threat to the established order of galactic civilization. Morrison waited patiently for the alien response while his crew prepared for whatever came next. Chief Carter kept the weapon systems ready to fire, and Commander Rodriguez coordinated defensive measures in case the aliens decided to make one final attack. Finally, Admiral Kethvar opened the communication channel and spoke the words that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. Captain Morrison, this is Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet. I acknowledge your warning, and I am ordering my forces to withdraw from this system. We will not return to human space. Morrison felt a wave of relief wash over him as he heard those words. The battle was over, and humanity had won not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through sheer determination and the willingness to fight by rules that their enemies could not understand or counter. Understood, Admiral, Morrison replied. Safe travels, and remember what you learned here today. 6 months after the battle at Kepler 442b, Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council, facing representatives from dozens of alien species. The massive chamber stretched out before him like a cathedral of crystal and metal, with delegates seated in carefully arranged sections according to their species and political importance. Morrison wore the dress uniform of the United Earth Fleet, with the new insignia that marked him as humanity's first ambassador to the galactic community. Behind him stood Commander Rodriguez and Chief Carter, along with other surviving crew members from the USS Defiance. Their presence served as a reminder of what humans could accomplish when pushed to their limits. The Krex delegate spoke first through the chamber's universal translation system. Her insect-like form clicked and chittered as she addressed the assembly with obvious nervousness. Admiral Morrison, your species has caused considerable disruption to the established order of galactic civilization. Our military analysts cannot predict human tactical responses using any known mathematical models. Morrison nodded respectfully toward the insect delegate. He had spent months preparing for this moment, and he understood the fear that his species had created among the established galactic powers. The battle with the Zephyrian fleet had sent shockwaves through every military academy and strategic planning center in known space. Honored delegates, Morrison began in a calm voice that carried to every corner of the vast chamber. Humanity seeks peaceful coexistence with all species in this galaxy. We did not choose the conflict with the Zephyrian Empire, but we finished it according to our own principles of warfare and survival. The Veltar representative rose from her aquatic environment suit to address the assembly. Her translated voice carried undertones of respect mixed with wariness. Admiral, the Zephyrian Empire has withdrawn all military forces to their core systems for the first time in 3 millennia. They have classified human space as a hazardous exploration zone and forbidden all contact with your species. Morrison allowed himself a small smile at that information. The Zephyrian withdrawal had been even more complete than he had hoped. Intelligence reports indicated that they had recalled fleets from across their empire to defend their home systems against the theoretical threat of human expansion. The crystalline Silani delegate spoke next, with light refracting through her translucent form as she moved. This withdrawal has created a power vacuum in this sector that threatens the stability of established trade routes and diplomatic relationships. How does humanity propose to address this situation? Morrison had anticipated this question, and he was prepared with an answer that would shape the future of human-alien relations. We propose the establishment of protected trade corridors through human space, with full guarantees of safe passage for all peaceful vessels. We will provide security for these routes at no cost to the galactic community. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs as delegates processed this unexpected offer. Most species that achieved military dominance in a region immediately began charging fees for passage and protection. Humans were offering to provide security services for free in exchange for peaceful recognition of their territorial claims. The Zephyrian representative sat in the section reserved for fallen empires, looking distinctly uncomfortable as the discussion continued. Admiral Kethvar had been stripped of his command after the defeat at Kepler 442b, but he had been sent to the Council as an expert on human military capabilities. The humans fight without regard for acceptable casualties or conventional tactical doctrine, Kethvar reported when called upon to address the assembly. They treat every engagement as a battle for survival, and they use methods that violate established principles of civilized warfare. Morrison stood and faced the former admiral across the chamber. Admiral Kethvar is correct about our methods, but he misunderstands our motivations. We fight desperately because we value freedom more than life itself. We use unconventional tactics because conventional tactics assume that both sides want to survive the battle. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications of that statement. Most galactic species had evolved military traditions based on limited conflicts with specific objectives. Humans had developed their fighting methods during total wars where defeat meant extinction or slavery. Dr. Martinez sat in the human delegation section analyzing the psychological responses of various alien species to Morrison's words. Her research during the past 6 months had revealed that most galactic civilizations had never encountered a species willing to accept massive casualties in pursuit of victory. The Krex delegate asked the question that was troubling many species in the assembly. Admiral Morrison, what assurance can you give that humanity will not use these same methods against peaceful neighbors who pose no threat to your survival? Morrison had expected this concern, and he was ready with the answer that would define humanity's place in galactic civilization. The same assurance that you give to your neighbors, honored delegate. We have no interest in conquering other species or expanding our territory through force, but we will defend ourselves and our allies by any means necessary. The Veltar representative requested clarification on a crucial point. Admiral, when you say allies, do you mean formal military partnerships or mutual defense agreements? Morrison smiled as he delivered the words that would reshape galactic politics. I mean any species that requests human protection will receive it regardless of their size or military capabilities. We learned long ago that freedom is not negotiable, and tyranny must be opposed wherever it appears. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates realized the full implications of Morrison's offer. Humanity was essentially offering to serve as the galaxy's police force against aggressive empires and military conquest. Small species that had lived in fear of stronger neighbors suddenly saw hope for genuine independence. The Silani delegate asked for specific details about human military doctrine. Admiral, can you explain how humanity would respond to future conflicts between galactic powers? Morrison stood and delivered the words that would echo through galactic history for generations to come. We will respond the same way we always have, honored delegate. We will identify the aggressor, and we will stop them using whatever methods prove necessary. We will continue fighting until they no longer have the ability or desire to threaten peaceful species. The final vote on the Terra Accords was unanimous. Every species in the Galactic Council agreed to recognize human territorial claims and accept their offer of military protection for peaceful trade and exploration. The agreement established humanity as the first species in galactic history to achieve dominant status through defensive rather than offensive military action. As Morrison left the chamber, he reflected on the irony of the situation. By proving that humans were too dangerous to fight, the galaxy had granted them a peace more secure than any negotiated treaty. The other species would respect human territory not because of friendship or trade agreements, but because they understood the cost of challenging human resolve. The USS Defiance continued its patrol missions along the Outer Rim with a crew that had become legendary throughout known space. Their victory over the Zephyrian fleet served as a reminder that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their numbers, but their absolute refusal to accept defeat regardless of the odds they faced.